Federalist 21, Part 3. Without a guarantee, the assistance to be derived from the Union in repelling those domestic dangers which may sometimes threaten the existence of the state constitutions must be renounced. Usurpations may rear its crest in each state and trample upon the liberties of the people, while a national government could legally do nothing more than behold its encroachments with indignation and regret. A successful faction may erect a tyranny on the ruins of order and law, while no succor would constitutionally be afforded by the Union to the friends and supporters of the government. Remember, in part 1 of this Federalist, I said if a faction or a 52% of population, just a small majority, a narrow majority, decides to not respect the rights of minority, they might just go ahead and trample upon the rights of the minority. And here Hamilton is saying, what if this happens? What if a group takes over power and not respects the minority? It might even cause for them to take up arms against the minority. Who is going to defend the minority? With this new constitution, we can defend the minority. We can defend a republican form of government. But under the Confederacy that we live under now, this cannot be done. And he is referring to what had just happened in Massachusetts towards the end of 1786, early 1787, Daniel Shays' rebellion. The tempestuous situation from which Massachusetts has scarcely emerged evinces that dangers of this kind are not merely speculative. Who can determine what might have been the issue of her late convulsions if the malcontents had been headed by a Caesar or by a Cromwell? He says if the person who was at the head of this rebellion had been somebody charismatic like Caesar or Cromwell, could we have stopped the rebellion? Could we have crushed it? No, the chances are no. He says, so we need a new system so that other states come to the help of one state in case a small majority takes over power and starts abusing the rights of the minority. Who can predict what effect a despotism established in Massachusetts would have upon the liberties of New Hampshire or Rhode Island, of Connecticut or New York? The inordinate pride of state importance has suggested to some minds an objection to the principle of a guarantee in the federal government as involving an officious interference in the domestic concerns of the members. A scruple of this kind would deprive us of one of the principal advantages to be expected from union, can only flow from a misapprehension of the nature of the provision itself. It could be no impediment to reforms of the state constitutions by a majesty of the people in a legal and peaceable mode. This right would remain undiminished. The guarantee could only operate against changes to be effected by violence. towards the prevention of calamities of this kind, too many checks cannot be provided. The peace of a society and the stability of government depend absolutely on the efficacy of the precautions adopted on this head. Where the whole power of the government is in the hands of the people, there is the less pretense for the use of violent remedies in partial or occasional distempers of the state. The natural cure for an ill administration in a popular or representative constitution is a change of man. A guarantee by the national authority would be as much leveled against the usurpations of rulers as against the ferments and outrages of faction and sedition in the community. So again, the national government can bring stability in case there is chaos in part of a state or state. So he's talking about that. Plus he says that if a wrong happens in the state government or even the federal government, as long as it's not been something violent, as long as they haven't done something violent, you can always wait till the next election and throw the bad people out. So that's kind of how the system works. The principle of regulating the contributions of the states to the common treasury by quotas is another fundamental error in the Confederation. So remember I said he's talking about three deficiencies, major problems with the Confederacy. This is the third one. The issue of quotas, the issues of asking different states, depending on the quota that was elected or quotas, that they contribute to the national government. He says, we've had experience with this. It hasn't worked. You ask for something from the state, they either ignore you or they comply with you halfway. Its repugnancy to an adequate supply of the national exigencies has been already pointed out and has sufficiently appeared from the trial which it has been made of it. I speak of it now solely with a view to equality among the states. Those who have been accustomed to contemplate the circumstances which produce and constitute national wealth must be satisfied that there is no common standard or barometer by which the degrees of it can be ascertained. Neither the value of lands nor the numbers of the people which have been successively proposed as the rule of state contributions has any pretension to being a just representative. If we compare the wealth of the United Netherlands with that of Russia or Germany, or even of France, and if we at the same time compare the total value of the lands and the aggregate population of the contracted territory of that republic with the total value of lands and the aggregate population of the immense regions of either of those other kingdoms, we shall at once discover that there is no comparison between the proportion of either of these two objects and that of relative wealth of those nations. If the like parallel were to be run between several of the American states, it would furnish a like result. Let Virginia be contrasted with North Carolina, Pennsylvania with Connecticut, or Maryland with New Jersey, and we shall be convinced that the respective abilities of those states in relation to revenue bear little or no analogy to their comparative stock in lands or to their comparative population. the position may be equally illustrated by a similar process between the counties of the same state. No man acquainted with the state of New York will doubt that the active wealth of Kings County bears a much greater proportion to that of Montgomery than it would appear to do if we should take either the total value of the lands or the total number of the people as a criteria. So he says when you're making requisitions, when you're asking states for money, there's really not a good way to do it. Do you go by the value of the land? Do you go by the property that people own? How much value are you going to put on it? He says this is going to create problems as it has created in the past. So he's starting to refresh the readers' minds that maybe if we just post or put a tax on imports, something that will be good for all of the states, maybe then we don't have to ask the states for money, make requisitions. And he says this is one of the things that the new Constitution is providing us. We can put tax on imports, we can sometimes use excise tax, and sometimes even for consumption, because there are some things, remember, he mentioned rum and the consumption of rum earlier in another Federalist. So he says sometimes we can put a tax on certain things, bring revenue for the state, as well as discourage people from doing things that will not be healthy for them nor the community. And he says sometimes you look at a small state like Netherlands, United Netherlands, and you compare it with a country like Russia, so vast. He says sometimes the size, the area of the land of the country, just like it would be for states, it doesn't give you a good barometer to make requisitions based on. So it says our states vary in population, vary in landmass, and sometimes it's difficult to make requisitions based on these two things. So it says we have to do something practical.